and mushroom foraging. Okay. So Anelia did such a good job introducing me. You already know loads about me. I can just skip over this slide. It is important not only to introduce yourself for kindness sake, but it is also a safety thing. You want to know how a person has acquired their knowledge when you are learning foraging from them or general plant ID. Um, just for your own safety and making sure that you're confident in their knowledge. So I am not an expert by any means. I am still learning. That means that I do not vet mushrooms for anybody. And I only personally forage more like beginner and intermediate mushrooms. Today, we'll be focusing on more beginner plants. All right, so for safety, we're looking at location, location, location. You want to make sure that when you're foraging, you're not foraging at the side of the road because that's dangerous for a number of reasons, not only to your physical well-being, as you might be in danger with cars, but also your health overall, because a plant that's growing by the side of the road is more likely to take in a lot of pollution, and it's not going to be great to consume. Next, we want to consider what plants are nearby that plant that we're looking at. Is there poison ivy? Is there baneberry? We need to be very considerate of that. For safety, we want to use all of our senses. We want to ensure that we're looking at the plant, we're touching the plant, we're using our sense of smell. All of them are important. When it comes to plant and mushroom ID, I've heard a common saying that it should be as easy for you as identifying an apple at the grocery store. Now, this takes practice, of course, but until you are able to, with 100% confidence, be like, that's an apple, you shouldn't be picking it for consumption. The way that you get this 100% certainty is not only through your own personal confidence and experience, but referencing multiple guidebooks. Finally, you have to research the preparation of the plant, as every single plant is unique. And just because one part of the plant is edible, another might not be. For any of you who are gardeners out there, you might be thinking about rhubarb at this point in time, right? We love the stalk, it's amazing, but we want to stay away from those leaves. All right. I'm going to show you two plants that you should be wary of. These are called baneberry or doll's eyes. They can come in a variety of colors, and they're cardiogenic toxin, and they're poisonous. So what this means is when something's poisonous, if we ingest it, it can hurt us. But when something's toxic, just touching it has the potential to hurt us, depending on its potency. Yeah. And so this one, some forests don't have a lot of it, but I've noticed it a lot more this year. And my personal theory that hasn't been proven is thanks to the bad tornado that we got this year, we have a lot more fallen trees and gaps in the tree canopy. And so that's allowing for a lot more sunlight to come through that maybe previously wouldn't. And so we're seeing more different ground cover coming up than previous years. I've had a person in my life who was collecting the berries so little children wouldn't pick them, and they started to feel a little unwell. And they thought they were getting heat strokes, so they went inside. And then they did their research and they realized that touching it was actually what was causing them some really unpleasant symptoms. So just keep that in mind. Next, we have poison ivy. Some of you are probably pretty familiar with this plant. Who here has heard of leaves of three, let it be? I know that's what I was always told growing up. But there are a lot of plants with three leaves. So we want to look beyond that. For me, the easiest identifier is the fact that the middle leaf always has a much longer stem. However, in its infancy, like this picture farthest to the right, when it's quite young, it's kind of difficult to tell that the middle stem is larger, and it just looks so different, right? You don't see the teeth, and it's rather waxy. And so poison ivy is a tricky one because it changes so much in its lifetime. In the fall, the photo right beside the young one, it can turn a beautiful red, and people aren't expecting that. So that's something to be wary of, is poison ivy can be red. And it can also reach quite a substantial height. So the image that I just pulled up, I want you to think about it for a moment and look at some of the other images. Okay. So this image is different than the other ones. We do not have a middle stem that is longer, and the leaves are equally spaced apart. So this is actually a trillium, but some people commonly mistake it. Oh, can we see it now?
No.
Oh, Ben, can you see it?
Yeah, there's the trillium with the white.
Yeah, so it just replaces.
Okay, there it is.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, sometimes it can be a little delayed in loading. Sorry about that. All right. Here we have another lookalike. We see 3 leaves. Oh, but the middle stem isn't longer. We also have more teeth, those pointy things along the leaves. And that's actually wild strawberry. And then we have another one. But looking at this, we're like, hey, wait a moment. Those leaves aren't equal in size, right? That's one tell. This plant, as it matures, like poison ivy, will have the middle leaf that's longer, but as it matures, you will see that the leaves are different in all sizes and they get a lot of leaves. That's sarsaparilla. So those are 2 plants to look out for, baneberry and poison ivy. All right, sustainability. So there are various ideas behind sustainability. These are my own personal ones. What you choose to apply is up to you. So I like to ask myself first, does this plant have a cultural use? For example, sweetgrass is something that I will not pick. I'm going to consider the rarity and whether or not this plant supports an endangered or threatened species. I'm going to look at the time of year that I want to harvest this plant. Will it hurt this plant if I'm taking from it during a specific time of year? The answer for some plants or a lot of plants is yes. The other thing I do is I look into that specific plant because every plant is unique. Some plants, like sweetgrass, actually benefit from us taking from it. And without taking from it, it will just go away because it requires, basically once we pull it, the roots get super stimulated and they send out a ton of shoots. Other plants, we want to make sure to only like gently cut from them and take a very limited quantity. Some you can take more. Every plant is unique. Following the dish with 1 spoon practice, we're not going to take more than we need. And I like to personally leave 2/3. Some people prefer to leave a half. That's up to you. And I always look for, as another forager using this site, I'm just harvesting for my own pleasure. So I'm not going to take it if I see that someone else is foraging it because I don't know their needs. Everyone's needs are different. This is sustainability in relation to mushrooms specifically. We want to only take the adult ones. And we can tell the adults often by their size and the fact that if they have a cap, it's going to be more expanded. This means that had a chance to spore. So its purpose or one of its main purposes are done. And I will use a mesh bag. You can use a sock bag, a grocery bag, whatever you'd like. This just helps spread around the spores as you hike. And therefore, the mushroom and the spores are able to spread farther than they would have been able to naturally. All right. So here's an example of a plant that some people like to forage for, milkweed. It's around a lot. However, a lot of the parts of the plants are poisonous. So going back to safety, only the young shoots are harvestable. But does it meet our sustainability criteria? Looking down below at the image, we see that it's an important food source for caterpillar, specifically the monarch butterfly. And because the monarch is such an endangered species, it's not as sustainable. Garlic mustard. It's an invasive species. It is super sustainable to harvest. You can harvest it young, making sure to take the root and packing this earth down and sprinkling some seeds in that are native if you can. And it's a super easy one to identify because of that unique garlic scent. At the bottom corner, you can see I made a little pesto. So that's an example of something that is unsustainable and something that's very sustainable to harvest. All right, let's get into it. Plant ID. So there are a couple of skills that we want to keep in mind for any single plant. We want to consider the texture, the color, the pattern of bark and stems, whether buds and twigs are opposite or alternate. We want to look at the leaves. What are they like? What's the shape? On the outside, are they lobed like an oak leaf? Are they parted? Are they entire? Are they serrated? Do they have teeth? Does it kind of look like a handprint? I want you to remember the handprint one. That'll come in handy later. Maybe it looks more like a spear, a large variety in shapes. And then you have a wide variety of seeds. They can be pods, they can be berries, they can be cones, they can be keys. The list goes on. But let's look at what you can forage for around your neighborhood. So one of my favorite things to forage for as it gets colder are white pine needles. Now, how to differentiate a white pine tree from other trees? Well, let's first look at the bark. It's dark, it's grayish brown, and it has broad, thick ridges. But I think the easiest identifier is the fact that it has bunches of 5 needles. So how I remember that is WHITE, white. White pines have 5 needles. This can be amazing if you want to make a tea with white pine needles. With any tea, you don't, or with most teas when you're foraging, you don't want to be putting it in boiling water because that's just going to kill all the vitamins. What you want to do instead is use hot water and kind of let that steep a little bit, but not boiling water. Like anything, however, it's important that you consult a doctor and do your research on it because, for example, if you are pregnant or nursing, white pine is something that you might not want to be consuming. It's an excellent source of vitamin C, and Jacques Cartier wouldn't have made it as far as he did if it weren't for Indigenous nations showing him and his crew how to survive in winter and recover from their scurvy. All right. We also have white spruce. Up in the corner, you can see a large container that I harvested of some white spruce tips. I like to do this in the springtime. However, there is a poisonous look-alike, sort of. I like to remember that yew is ew. Yew's needles are flat, and yew's needles aren't all around the plant, but rather they just kind of stick out in certain sections on the sides. Whereas the spruce, the needles are everywhere, they're sharp, and they're nice and round. Now you might be thinking that's a rather large container if you're foraging sustainably. And believe it or not, it was sustainable and all from the same tree. This was because after that tornado, there were some trees blown down that were going to be removed, and I knew that they wouldn't have a chance to seed, so I was able to take a lot. So there are some differing circumstances, and that just shows that sustainability is really unique to every single circumstance. It's going to be different. All right, this is an amazing plant that you could go out today and collect. Always with some additional research, however. So wild grapevines, you want to look for clusters, kind of like at the grocery store where we get grapes, they're in a cluster. You want leaves with some teeth or serration. To me, the leaves kind of look like a big maple that got blown up a little bit. And the berries themselves have 3 seeds. Now, the thing about grapevine, just like many other plants, is it likes to grow beside some things that are poisonous. So you have Virginia creeper. Now looking at the leaves, they look very different, don't they? One is that palm high five leaf, and the other is more of a maple. That's pretty distinct. And if that wasn't distinct enough, looking at the berries, they're not in clusters. It has a red stem. Everything's all off there. Canada moonseed, I suppose it can kind of look similar. But once again, we look at the leaves. That doesn't look like a blown up maple to me. I'm not seeing significant teeth or serration. And then when I actually look at the berries, they're not properly clustered. If I was to pick that up, it would like dangle from different sides. And it's just like a really weak stem. Wild grapes are so great this time of year because the frost actually helps the sugars become more accessible to us. So at first, when the grapes are growing, they're pretty tart, but around this time of year, when the first frost has happened, they're perfect. 10 out of 10 would recommend. In springtime, there's staghorn sumac. You could also harvest it in the fall, but the clusters are best before it's rained a lot because it's water soluble. So that means essentially the flavor gets washed away with the rain. So we don't want that. I did want to show you this because it's one of my favorite things. Plus, I wanted to show you this to demonstrate that there can be some weird things that you medically need to look out for. So for example, I'm someone with a person in my life who is anaphylactic to pistachios. Would I have ever thought that staghorn sumac can produce a reaction to someone who's allergic to pistachios? No, they're so different, but they can. So sometimes certain plants will surprise you like that. So that's an example of it's always good to do your research if you are someone with existing health conditions. All right, I could do an entire slideshow just on spring and summer, but because it's fall, we're going to be focusing on, I'm sure what many of you are excited for, fungi. Now, the ID book that I have up there is the National Audubon Society Field Guide to Mushrooms in North America. It is my all-time favorite guide, and it's many foragers' favorite guide. It's very accurate. It's very easy to use. And for those of you who might attend the hike, I can show you how to use it in person. So what we want to consider when identifying mushrooms is the habitat and time of year. So there are some mushrooms that only grow on wood. And not only that, there are certain mushrooms that have a connection with different trees and a unique connection. Mushrooms are incredible. They connect the entire forest. What we see of a mushroom here is like an apple to an apple tree. It is the fruiting body. The rest of the organism is within the bark, within the soil, and it connects the whole forest. This is incredible because if you have a tree that is struggling a little bit and you have a tree that's related to that one tree is going to signal for help, and the other tree, through the mushroom network, is going to be able to send that nutrients and that support to another tree. We're still learning so much about it, but it's amazing. There's also moisture. All mushrooms need a degree of moisture. That's why it's best around spring, summer, fall, but especially fall. Certain mushrooms that will require even more moisture. So for example, the image on the far right, that one only grows in wetlands. And then there are some mushrooms that grow exclusively on the ground in soil. We'll kind of dive into those. There's cap shape. Is it concave or is it convex? Is it shaped like a trumpet or a vase? There are so many different ones. We want to consider cap characteristics. The color is really important, or rather the colors. The scales on top are important. The hairs, the webs that it can create, like this poisonous webbed mushroom here. and the margins of the mushroom. And by that, I mean on the outside, what does it look like? Are there little dots? Is it wavy? Is it kind of almost looks like frilly like this one? All of that can be really critical in properly identifying mushrooms. Oh, and here's an example of like a little version, a cute version of an amanita, which is what you see that has scales. And the scales are actually left over from when it was a baby and it was in a sac, and then it grows and grows and grows and grows. That sac rips open, but some pieces of the sac remain. Gill type. Now, it might seem a little strange that within gill type, I have gills. I realize this. Gills are the overarching term for what's underneath that mushroom, okay, if it has a cap. But they can have pores, they can have gills, or they can have teeth. Within these categories, there's a lot of different variation. The pores can be very big, very small. The teeth similarly can be huge or barely visible. So there's a lot of different variations. Today, we're going to be focusing on mushrooms that mainly have pores. As a beginner, it's important if you're looking at foraging for consumption that you are staying away from mushrooms with gills. You're also looking at bleeding, bruising, staining. So here, the image beside me, the image to my left is an orange melt cap, and its characteristic is it kind of bleeds this almost like neon orange Cheeto color. And then on the other side, you can see that a friend has carved a nipissing, which is where I'm at right now, into a mushroom that stains. The stalk. Oh, this is one of the most important things because it is going to tell you, is this a part of the world's most poisonous category of mushrooms or not? Okay. So once again, we have to look at shape, color. We also have to consider firmness. Like in this example of the chanterelles, one is a false chanterelle and its stalk is really flimsy. The other has a much thicker and firmer stalk. Is the stalk hollow like the false chanterelle? You're also looking for this term called the annulus ring. This is located about 2/3 of the way up the mushroom, as you can see in the image on the middle, that little ring or skirt. And how that ring forms actually is on the photo on the bottom. When a mushroom is young, its cap is like connected to the stalk sometimes, okay? And then as it grows, that cap separates from the stalk, and sometimes that leaves a ring. So that's how you get the annulus ring. And the vulva, or the sac-like cup at the base, is left over from the universal veil. So that one where it's kind of like in a pod when it's the baby, and then it expands, and then you're left with the scales on top. So something to know is sometimes the sac-like cup or the remnants of the universal veil are hidden below the dirt. So when looking at mushrooms, it's always a good idea to brush them aside to really look at what is this mushroom. But something that I will say, because I know it's a common myth or worry, within Turtle Island, within North America, you do not have to worry about touching any single mushroom. There has been no mushroom that has been found to be toxic. Lots of poisonous mushrooms, but no toxic mushrooms. So you're welcome to touch them as much as you like. So far, there's only one mushroom in the entire world that's been found to be toxic, and that's in Southeast Asia. So I think we're pretty safe here. All right. The smell, just like all of your senses, it's important to engage your sense of smell. Sometimes it's almost like they have no scent. Other times it can be fruity, kind of like a chanterelle. It has like an apricot scent. Other times it can be very earthy. Sometimes it can be very unpleasant. Like I'm talking, you're 2 meters away from that mushroom and you need to be 8 meters away from it. Those are stinkhorns, especially. Awful smell, but some really pretty unique mushrooms in the stinkhorn category. Some can be seafood-like. This photo on the right here is actually an oyster mushroom. And to me, smells very, very potent and like seafood. To other people, they report a black licorice scent, so it can be all over the place. All right. I wanted to go over some common groups of fungi so that when you're going out there and you're beginning to identify just for pleasure, because you always just start just for fun, never to eat, just for fun. You want to kind of know what are some broader categories. So there are slime molds, and they have an asterisk because they're technically not even a part of the fungi kingdom, but they're fungus-like. So fungi have or rather slime molds are made of cellulose, which is different than fungi. And they have the ability to move towards their nutrient source rather quickly. Slime molds, so little about them is known, and we are still learning about them. But I always like to cite this one study in Japan where they were trying to improve their transportation system. And what they used are slime molds. So they put in like the existing locations that they wanted the stops to be. And they used the slime molds to figure out what are the easiest pathways and the most effective pathways to get there, because that's how, frankly, intelligent the slime molds are. So pretty incredible. Something unique and what makes me love them is how different they are within a 24-hour period. So the chocolate tube slime mold located on the bottom left, that's going to look like insect eggs if I caught that photo 10 hours before. It would look like little tiny insect eggs. And then as it grows, it develops these beautiful chocolate tubes. And then if you touch it, the spores go everywhere. Lots of fun. There are others that start off like a dull foresty, almost olive green. That's dark, like the wolf's milk down here, and then turn into a beautiful bright coral. There are some that look like carnival hot air balloons, in my opinion. And there are others that look like scrambled eggs. So the world of slime molds is incredible, and I really encourage you looking at some. Jellies. These are super fun. Some look like brains, some look like blobs, ears, or even leaves. They can be soft and gelatinous or really quite stiff and rubbery. They tend to have warmer colors like yellow, reds, and oranges, but they can also have dark brown or black. There are some edible ones within this category, but none that I would recommend for people who are just starting out. Corals. Oh, I think this is one of the most photogenic categories. They get the name corals because they look like something like corals under the sea. You have some really neon colors that come out of this category, like that neon yellow, that bright fluorescent pink. Corals can be somewhat tricky to identify. Like the image here on the right, you would have to look at how many points does this have, and then count how many like the crown, so like how many points are within that. It's a little finicky. Once again, almost all mushroom categories have something that's edible within it, but not worth it. This category is not worth it. All right, we have cup-shaped mushrooms. I think these are some of the cutest mushrooms. They tend to be on the smaller side and very brightly colored. My personal favorite that I've seen is the eyelash cup. You'll see this often on rotting wood, just like other cup-shaped mushrooms. So when you're uncertain and on a walk and really want to find mushrooms, one of the best places to look is on rotting logs as you're walking about. And I know that around Oakville, you guys have really amazing and diverse mixed forests in terms of, and old growth forests, or ones that are similar to old growth. And so you'll have a lot of logs to look at. Veiled mushrooms. Now, this is kind of, I didn't make up this category, but rather this is a very large category that is separated into other categories. Veiled mushrooms, you have to have a very healthy respect for. They're the most poisonous mushrooms. You're going to see the ones with attached gills, one with separated, so or free gills. That's about how the gill structure connects to the stalk. but we're not going to worry about that because we're not IDing, or I wouldn't recommend ever IDing mushrooms with gills as we're just learning.
Really?
Yeah, because it is the most poisonous category. It's too easy to misidentify. In fact, there are some mushrooms where in the guild category that your last line of defense and hope to identify it correctly is taking it home and doing a spore print. We'll get into the spore print in a little bit. But yeah, I'm not I'm not doing that. No way. So I like to look at these. I like to make spore prints with them for fun. But that's about it. They also photograph really well. All right, puffballs and earth stars. Puffballs is a category that has some amazing edible mushrooms within it, and we'll definitely be discussing that in a few slides. But something to keep in mind is they do have poisonous lookalikes. Just like almost every mushroom, there's a poisonous lookalike. We have morel stinkhorns and other club-shaped mushrooms. These can be really excellent for photography. And of course, there are some edible morels that you can have. I've personally had rotten luck with morels. And I was trying to make a joke there because I always find them when they're already like rotten. So I haven't personally had luck, and I only teach what I have actually consumed. So I won't be showing you the edibility factor of morels today. I also find them sometimes a little tricky. This category is super diverse in terms of what the cap can look like. It can be almost like that honeycomb structure. It can almost look like it has no cap. It can be really wrinkly, super diverse. Then we have shelf-like polypores. And I purposely put something in here that didn't really look shelf-like to me, but it's still nonetheless a shelf-like polypore. There are a variety of medicinal mushrooms within this grouping. They tend to be very large, woody, some are very stiff, and they all grow on wood. The trick with this, there are some mushrooms that only grow on wood that you might find on the ground. This is because wood can be buried, right? The wood can be covered over a little bit by leaf litter or soil. And I think that's where the most amount of people can run into trouble, is when they just think, oh, this is on the ground or this is on wood, so it can't be the poisonous lookalike that grows. Insert where it grows here. So you always, again, want to brush aside what you're digging up and see. And next we have, oh, sorry, we're just pulling out my notes here. Okay, next we have the bullets category. They tend to be very fleshy, large, sturdy. Here's my hand in comparison to the cap. That even doesn't do it quite justice, though. I should have gotten my hand in closer to see that it's like actually it was the size of my hand. This category has many different edible types, like the king bullet in here. And it's slightly more beginner friendly, or at least it's intermediate friendly, because we're working with pores, not gills. All right, fungi for art. This is probably one of my favorite uses. We have photography. Now, I'm not amazing with photographs, but I still think these images look pretty darn good, if I do say so myself. And so you don't need to be a photographer to have really amazing, cool photos. I'm completely biased. Sorry for the birders out there, but I do think mushrooms make the best photos. However, I'm still thinking about you birders. In fact, I included on the upper middle section here. Can you see my cruiser when I do this? I think so. Hopefully. Okay, good. So this one here is actually called bird's nest fungi because it looks like it has little eggs inside. So there's a connection there. We have conch shell or artist conch. It's incredible. You can harvest it and leave it to dry a little bit and then do a design, or you can use it when wet. If you use it while it's still moist, it's going to leave a nice dark, rich brown marking. If you use it when it is, so yeah, if you use it when wet, dark, rich brown. If you use it when dry, it's going to leave more of a white marking. And if you want to create the brown, you're going to have to carve deeper. So this is an example of something that I carved out. I just used a toothpick to do it, but I waited for it to dry because I wanted to have the white coloration. I've also done other ones. I don't know if it will show up well. It's not maybe going to show up super well, but like little hedgehog. I was inspired. I saw this design online, thought it was super cute. We have spore prints. I'm still working on spore prints a little bit. There are a wide array of colors. There are black, brown, yellow, white. There's even purple. It is incredible. Some spore print colors are going to show best on black paper, whereas others you'll want to use white paper. How you do this is you want to, sustainability factor. You're taking an older mushroom, you're putting it in some kind of bag with aeration with holes, walking around with it for a little bit. Then once you get home, or in the forest itself, you can remove the stalk. You're going to place the mushroom face down, and then you're going to cover over the mushroom. I cover it with a bowl. Some people use tin foil, whatever you'd like. You can wait 12 to 24 hours. Then you're going to remove the cap and just hairspray the pour down. And then you have some really amazing art. Oop. I have some here that have showed up as an example of brown. And then my example of purple, it's not going to show up on camera well. All right, mushrooms for harvest. So I was on I've always heard the term, the saying, everything is edible once, right? Meaning that you can eat it, but you might die after. I'm not trying to scare you with mushrooms. I definitely want you guys to be comfortable touching them, using them for art, but there is no such thing as being fairly certain that it's an edible mushroom and the edible mushroom you want. You have to be 100% certain. On a foraging walk that I recently did, I heard a speaker say that there are old mushroom hunters, there are bold mushroom hunters, but there are no old, bold mushroom hunters. And to really bring this point home, on that intermediate hike, I had a person beside me who harvested these two. And looking at the bottom, we clearly see these are two very different mushrooms. In fact, one of them is a poisonous webcap mushroom, and the other is a perfectly edible hedgehog mushroom. But this person, I think they were really focused on looking at the cap and the stalk more so, and they kind of forgot to look underneath the mushroom. And that can't be a thing, because that could have potentially lethal consequences. So I really stress it. If we're just starting out, our role is to explore, engage in art, and get more familiar with mushrooms, and going through citing different sources, looking at different guidebooks, and getting used to some of the terminology. It can be a little daunting at first, but again, I can help you through it on our hike. All right, consumption safety. So just like anything that we're consuming, right? We need to make sure, is it safe? The environment that we took it in. For example, if there is a farm nearby that's using a lot of pesticides or manure, I might not want to be taking a plant from there. We only want to eat nice and fresh things. We don't want to eat things if they're moldy or squishy. We want to brush off soil before we put it into our little aerated bags or baskets. I A lot of people just carry around like little cheap paintbrush to do that in a field. It helps a lot. We want to make sure that we have 1 or 2 good guidebooks on us. I'm not sponsored by them, I swear, guys. It's just, it is the best. I love it. Then there are some more mushroom specific things. So we're not the only things that love eating mushrooms. In fact, so many animals, from deer to slugs, love eating mushrooms. So a lot of times you're going to come across a mushroom and there's going to be a slug who has already begun its meal. Now, this one is up to personal preference. So if I see that there's maybe they've quite literally just begun and there's like an individual hole, I will pick up the slug, put it on another mushroom that it might like, and I will take the mushroom. But if I see that, they're well into their meal, I don't want to disturb them. But also, I don't think you want a slug infested mushroom. So I leave it for the slugs. Regardless, you want to make sure cook all your mushrooms before eating. Yes, there are some mushrooms that you can technically consume and just by popping it in your mouth, but because you don't know what's been on it, I wouldn't do that. For example, slugs, their slime, depending on the slug, can carry some pretty nasty things. You don't know if a dog's been by there. There's a variety of reasons, right? We always want to cook before eating. All right. So for medicinal mushrooms that you guys might be interested in harvesting, we have turkey tail. It is semicircular. It has at least 3 different colored rings. It has white to yellow pores on the on the underside. It almost looks like you could take like a little sewing needle and make the holes. That should be about the hole size. And it typically grows on dead deciduous wood or in wounds, also on some conifers. Now I want you guys to take a moment and look at the images. One of these is turkey tail and the other isn't. Look at the list and think to yourself, what one could it be? Okay. So the one on the left is turkey tail because we see it has at least 3 ring colors. But the other one, the false turkey tail, we can't really see the pores, can we? It almost looks like they're invisible. Whereas with the turkey tail on the underside, I can see those little pin mark pores. Another tell is turkey tail always has a white ring around the outside. The outermost ring is white. And turkey tail won't have a stalk of sorts. A lot of shelf mushrooms will just have this kind of shape to it, whereas if we look at that false turkey tail, it looks like it has a bit of almost like a mini stalk, and when you take it out from a tree, it will look like you just ripped out a plug. We have some key things about how turkey tail is arranged, because not just how it looks, but how it's formed also matters. So turkey tail, you're going to see overlapping parts. They grow in clusters. If it's on the side of the log, it's going to be kind of growing in a stacked line cluster. But when it's growing on top of a log, you might be lucky and see some rosettes. Like that photo on the right, it does kind of look like a rose, doesn't it? With a variety of layers and growing on top of one another. It's quite beautiful. And the advantage of seeing rosettes is most turkey tail lookalikes don't grow in a rosette form, but turkey tail won't always show rosettes. Here is another common lookalike versus turkey tail. Once again, we want to consider and think to ourselves, do I see the white ring? Do I see little do I see little pinpoint pores? Do I see 3 rings, that at least 3 rings of color? Do I see a stalk? No stalk? And then look at the other one. Take notice. What does the ring color kind of look like on the outside? what do the underside look like? What does it look like? Well, if you said or thought to yourself that the underside looks like teeth on one of them and pores on the other, you would be correct. If you're thinking, hey, it almost looks a little purple towards the outside, you'd also be correct. One is a violet tooth polypore and the other is turkey tail. Turkey tail can be tricky because it comes in a lot of different colors, but regardless of the color, you're always going to have that white ring on the outside and little pinpoint holes. Turkey tail is a medicinal mushroom. Before use, always consult a healthcare practitioner. You never know how it's going to interact with you. However, there are some pretty amazing things with it aiding inflammation. I've met some people who it's pretty life-changing for them, actually. Just like anything, we don't want to boil it. That's going to kill all the good things. And we don't want to steep it in boiling water because that's also going to kill a lot of the good things. We want to let it soak for a while at a low but still hot temperature. All right. Giant puffballs. Now we're getting into non-medicinal and ones that we're actually eating. So they can be found in lawns and meadows. They can be big, round, and white inside and out. They can have, they do have a short, dark root structure. Sometimes it can be difficult to see. There are smaller versions of puffballs that are edible. However, there are also a lot of poisonous mushrooms that can look like a small puffball. So we're only looking at harvesting a giant puffball. I personally think they're one of the best beginner mushrooms to look at when it comes to edibility, because when you cut it in half, you're going to see, is it white? Is it firm on the inside? If it's black on the inside, it's a poisonous pigskin puffball, and that doesn't look edible to me. It's not, right? But the nice white, firm inside, it's an obvious tell. Plus, there's no other mushroom that grows to be the size of a beach ball. So you're very safe if it's white on the inside and outside and, you know, looks like a beach ball. Now, thinking about sustainability, puffballs are a lot to eat, so we don't want to take more than we need. But I've also maybe somewhat tricked you on this slide, depending on what you were looking at, because I put in one of the world's most poisonous mushrooms here. That's not the poisonous pigskin. I put in the destroying angel. And so I wanted to show you that while it's young and the super tiny puffball form, and especially if we were to imagine that soil was kind of coating the remnants of the veil, it could just look like a puffball. And so that's why we don't want to go for puffballs when they're little until we're more experienced, or at all. It's up to personal preference. I just like to harvest the nice, big, obvious ones. In fact, here's me with a giant puffball. And I made this one into slabs. I kind of cooked it up. This image actually wasn't mine. I don't know why I didn't take a photo of how I prepared it. Some people like to do puffball pizzas. Other people might want to chop it up, dry it out, grind it up, and it can be a really great thing to kind of make gravy out of that's higher in protein. We have chanterelles. They're most often found on the ground by oaks or conifers, and they grow singly. This is important. So there might be a lot of them growing, but they do not grow in clusters. Chanterelles have false gills. I know, you thought I was going back on my no gill thing. I wasn't. So false gills, they look very veiny, and they're stronger than normal gills. Chanterelles are yellow to yellow-orange. They're convex, and as they age, they become more vase-shaped. They have wavy margins. They can be odorless or have that nice fruity apricot smell. Oh, and the stalk is more sturdy than a false chanterelle. As you can see, the stalk is not hollow like a false chanterelle. And the interesting thing is, historically, the false chanterelle was labeled as being poisonous. So there are still some guidebooks, depending on when they were published, that will have false chanterelle as listed as poisonous. It might be more likely to cause you some digestive unrest, but there are a lot of people who eat false chanterelles. The reason you don't want to harvest false chanterelles is because it is a closer lookalike to the poisonous, deadly jack-o'-lantern. So chanterelles already somewhat look like jack-o'-lantern if we're not paying attention, but false chanterelles look even more like it. I would recommend, once again, cooking it. It's great with butter in a pan. Don't overcook, leads to rubbery texture. The jack-o'-lantern gets its own slide because it's so important that we know what this looks like. So the jack-o'-lantern, number one, it has gills, whereas chanterelles have false gills, or like those ridges, okay? Jack-o'-lantern always grows in a cluster. Do you see how, as that person is holding the mushroom, it's just like, it looks like it's sprouting from their hands almost? That will never happen with chanterelles. Now, this is a safety consideration. Some people will think, that's gotta be a chanterelle though, it's growing on the ground. I know jack-o'-lantern only grows on wood. However, once again, if that wood is buried, it can seem like it's just growing from the ground. So we want to be careful about that. However, if you are lucky enough to come across jack-o'-lantern, make a note of it and maybe return to the trail with a friend in the evening, because they glow in the dark. So that's super cool. Our final edible mushroom that I internally debated putting this on the slide is chicken of the woods, or also known as the sulfur shelf. I would say start with puffballs and wild grapes for today. And even before that, if we're not used to being outside, get used to getting comfortable, exploring, identifying. If we are someone who's a little more experienced, then looking at wild grapes and puffballs can be a great start. Every species that you're trying to learn one at a time. Become best friends with it, and you know it like you know your sister. That is how knowledgeable you want to be. Chicken of the woods, there are two different types. If in the far future you want to harvest it, I'd recommend going for the version that is more white or salmony. Someone made this excellent little infographic. The reason why I want you to go for the white poured chicken of the woods is because there are fewer technicalities and fewer things that we might mistake it for. So it can be pale orange, salmon pink, velvety smooth, slightly wrinkly appearance. And if the whole mushroom looks good, intact, you can take it all. Whereas with the other one, you can't do that. Now, I decided to put chicken of the woods on here and sulfur shelf to show you the importance of looking at multiple guides. So in one trusty guide of mine, they were just saying, avoid harvesting from only eucalyptus. Then I pulled up another guide and I got the rest of this list. Lotus, hemlock, pine, fir, spruce, larch, tamarack. Whew, that's a lot. It also shows you the importance of tree ID with mushroom ID. They're intertwined. You can't separate one from the other. If you want to improve one, you're going to improve in the other category. For that reason, if in the far future you're looking at harvesting chicken of the woods for edibility, you want to look at the base of oaks. That's the other reason why I like the white one, because we know what an oak leaf looks like, that nice lobed shape, nice and easy and identifiable. All right. My final thoughts, I want you guys to get out there and explore. Don't be afraid to touch mushrooms. They're wonderful things. Take lots of photos, experiment with some spore prints, take home some mushrooms, use them for art. If you're interested more in foraging for medicinal or food uses, get in touch with your healthcare practitioner, get yourself multiple books. And I say books and not apps, because applications are a great starting point on your phone, but they're more often wrong than they are right. So they're a jumping off point where you're like, oh, okay, I know what to look at in terms of I need to look up this species to make sure it's not this species. But beyond that, should always be guidebooks, and getting out there as much as possible will be your best friend. And that's the presentation. Thank you so much, guys, for listening. Do you have any questions for me? I know it was a
Well,
lot.
It was wonderful. Thank you. And very well spoken.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
We will be sending up a follow-up email, probably at the end of the day today. I know a lot of those present indicated their interest in doing our follow-up nature walk on October 16th. We'll be finalizing the location for that today. So if you're still interested in that, I'll have an email sent out to you by the end of the day. If you have any follow-up questions, you're welcome to contact myself. I can put you in contact with Jillian if you have any outstanding concerns, or hold on to them, write them down. She'll be joining us for our nature walk on the 16th. Amelia, do you have any?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Jillian. That was fantastic. Very informative. It was really amazing and kind of inspiring for us to get outside and start exploring right now.